right, welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about the much anticipated Manuscript 512.
Much anticipated.
Right, and so this document's really interesting to me because it's so old, right? It could be completely fake, it could be half truth, or it could be the whole truth. And we're not certain because now we know so many things in the jungle have been overcome by the jungle, right? And even in the last 200 years, right? But this document comes from the 1600s, which is absolutely insane to me. Like, this is such an old document, right? Handwritten, everything, you know,
Right.
It's not like it just appeared on the internet in some like Reddit forum or something and people are going off on it. So a little bit of preface. So before people were even in the Americas, there's always been a tale of a lost city civilization that was filled with riches.
Right. It's a trope.
Right. You have Atlantis, you have High Brazil, you have Agartha, you have Shangri-La, High Brazil, you know, so on and so forth,
Hyperborea.
right? Hyperborea.
Atlantis.
I already said
Yes,
Atlantis.
yes,
yeah.
you
I'm trying to steal my thunder there. Thunder always comes after lightning.
Ka-chow.
Kachiga. But so even before Columbus came across the ocean, there were already lost cities, you know, that people wanted to go discover. And yeah, like you said, it's a trope that everyone tries to follow. So before we get into the actual reading of the manuscript, I kind of wanted to just read through the Wikipedia article so that everyone can kind of see like what people's thoughts on it now are, and then we'll go into actually reading it, and then we'll go into some more of the internet forums where people have done a little bit more research and they present their ideas there in a non-super professional setting.
Get into some hypotheticals.
Right. And so here's a Wikipedia article. Manuscript 512 is a 10-page manuscript of dubious veracity and unknown authorship that relates to the discovery of a lost city in the Brazilian province, now state, of Bahia by a group of bandeirantes. Oh, yeah, bandeirantes.
Bandeirantes.
Oh, bandeirantes. I forgot. It's Portuguese, so me trying to say it in Spanish does not work. In 1753. Oh, so it is from 1753. Oh, right. There's a preface story. Okay. All right. My bad, everyone. Not the 1600s. The story that inspired the people in the 1700s was from the 1600s. Right. Let's get our facts straight before I start making a podcast. Originally found in 1839 at the National Library of Brazil, where it is kept to this day, the document describes curious sites, monuments, and artifacts of Greco-Roman appearance found by the group in the abandoned settlement.
Dun, dun, dun.
Jace, insert that noise. All right. The manuscript is one of the most famed documents of the National Library's collection, and some Brazilian historians consider it the greatest myth of national archaeology, while others praise its vivid and picturesque writing style. During the 19th and 20th centuries, Manuscript 512 was the object of intense debate and instigated many expeditions by adventurers and investigators, notably Sir Richard F. Burton, who published the work Highlands of Brazil in 1869, and Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett, who disappeared on one of his Lost City of Zed expeditions through inner Brazil, resulting in several attempts to find him. Now, as a side note, Colonel Fawcett is the inspiration for Indiana Jones.
Yes.
That's pretty ballin'.
Some cool stuff right there.
Right? The Lost City described in the manuscript inspired several articles, films, and novels, such as José de Alencar's As Minas de Prata in 1865, Rider Haggard's King Solomon's Mines in 1886, Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World in 1912. In addition, the character Indiana Jones may have been inspired by the events surrounding Colonel Fawcett. That's awesome. Access to the original document is very restricted, but a digitalized version is currently available online. And like, you guys can just Google Manuscript 512 PDF and like dozens of versions of it will pop up. So, in 1839, naturalist Manuel Ferreira Lagos casually found the document whose full title was I can't read Portuguese.
Relação histórica de uma oculta e grande povoação
Antiguísima, moradores
yeah.
que se descubrió de ano de 1753.
Wow, I'm really blanking on my Spanish here. It's not Spanish, it's Portuguese.
It's 16,000, right? You would say 1700,
No.
and then what? 53, but that's Spanish, so let's not butcher.
Let's not butcher their beautiful
Anyhow,
language.
historical relation of an occult, large, very old settlement with no inhabitants that was founded in the year 1753. What a obscure title. No wonder nobody read it.
Right.
In the library's collection, right? He then presented it to the Brazilian Historic and Geographic Institute, and Canon Friar Januario da Cunha Barbosa later publicized a full copy of the manuscript in the Institute's magazine Revista do Instituto Histórico e Geográfico Brasileiro.
Yeah, you got
Something like that.
Yeah.
Or Brasileiro, I don't know, with a preface connecting it to the earlier case of Robredo Diaz, also known as Muribeca. That name, keep that name in mind. A bandeirante, okay. So a bandit who goes. Arrested by the Portuguese crown for refusing to give information about mines of precious metals in Bahia, which later propelled numerous expeditions in the province. Although the author of Manuscript 512 was and still is not identified, the members of the Institute took the account as authentic in hopes of finding the ruins of an advanced civilization in Brazil, a nation that had recently achieved its independence and sought to build a strong national identity. At the time, ruins of pre-Columbian civilizations had recently been found in Latin America, such as Palenque in Mexico and fortifications in the Peruvian border, and that could signify that similar monuments were also hidden in Brazil. That's quite logical.
It is, right.
Right? Accounts about rocks with purportedly pre-Columbian inscriptions were common since colonial times. One of such examples was the Igna stone found in Paraíba, in 1598, so super early, right? Which contains what appears to be Latin letters. That might, in and of itself, be its own video.
Right.
As such, Manuscript 512 strengthened the theory that an ancient Greco-Roman civilization could have existed at some remote time in Brazil. I had a lot of friends ask me if we're looking for Atlantis in Brazil. I was like, well, quite possibly.
You could put it that way.
Yeah, Greco-Romans, so were the Greeks and the Romans inspired by this Atlantis?
Right.
Atlantis coming up. In 1840, Ignacio... I want to say Accioli, but that's Italian, right? So Accioli Silva
I would assume it's
and A. Moncorvo, two scholars from Salvador, Bahia, opined that the account about the lost city could be authentic because, according to explorers and some old inhabitants of the location, large ruins populated by runaway native and black slaves were commonly mentioned in tradition. Historian Pedro Calmon explains that rumors about ruins were already popular after the death of Bandeirante João Guimarães in 1766. And I need to stop pausing every time I get a question myself. By the 1840s, were fully consolidated in addition to being mixed with stories about indigenous refugees or quilombos in Inner Bahia. Between 1841 and 1846, searches for the lost city, sponsored by the Brazilian Historic and Geographic Institute, were conducted by Friar Benigno José de Carvalho through Chapada Diamantina. Yeah. Despite Carvalho's reported diligence, the expeditions were unsuccessful, and the previous enthusiasm about the city's existence was replaced by delusion and skepticism. Well, that doesn't fit the standard model. A predominant theory at the time was that the vision of the lost city was inspired by the strange rocky formations of the Chapada Diamantina. Teodoro Sampaio,
Sampaio.
who traveled through the region between 1789 and 1879 and 1880, was convinced that the account of Manuscript 512 was fictional and described the mountain range poetically. The number 512, by which the manuscript is currently known, first appeared in 1881 in the Exposition Catalogue of the History of Brazil by Ramiz Galvão. Okay, so now it talks about the content, right? So we're going to skip over to the actual document itself. Don't worry, guys, I'm not going to try to read it in Portuguese. I'm going to read it in English.
We butchered their beautiful language twice then.
Descuartizarme una idioma bonita. That's Spanish, though. Okay, Manuscript 512. Historical report of a great and hidden city, ancient and without residents, which was discovered in the year 1753 in the Americas, blank. Oh, by the way, these blank spots that you see on these PDFs, like where there's ... a bookworm ate those spots. And of course, so it's all in the important spots.
Right.
Like, oh, and Colonel worm did and he killed the worm. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. So I'm going to just say blank, like, and pause every time you say it, or I might just have like a jolt in my speech, right? So, Manuscript 512. Historical report of a great and hidden city, ancient and without residents, which was discovered in the year 1753. In the Americas, in the interior, contiguous with Colonel and his company, having 10 years, traveled through the hinterlands to see if they could find the legendary silver mines of the great discoverer Muribeca, which by fault of a governor were not made known, for he wished to rob Muribeca of his glory, and had him imprisoned in Bahia until his death, and they remained to be found. This notice came to Rio de Janeiro in the beginning of the year 1754. After a wide-reaching and bothersome journey, prompted on by the insatiable lust for gold, and almost lost in many years through this vast hinterland, we discovered a range of mountains so high that they appeared to reach the ethereal realm, and to serve as throne to the wind, to the very stars. The shining, which we were able to admire from afar, principally when the sun made impression upon the crystal which the mountains were composed of, created such a grand and pleasing sight that nobody could take their eyes off of those reflections. It began raining before we could enter upon a survey of this crystalline structure, and we could see the waters running upon the bare rock, descending from the high cliffs, looking like snow stricken by the sun's rays, because of the pleasing sight of that would be reduced of the waters and tranquility of the weather. We resolved to investigate that wondrous miracle of nature, reaching the foot of the mountains without any encumbrance of bush or rivers to make our passage difficult. However, circling the mountains, we couldn't find a clear path by which to carry out our design of tackling these Brazilian Alps and Pyrenees. It's so interesting that they go back and they always refer to things that they know, right? This disappointment resulting for us in an indescribable sadness. Our tents pitched, and planning on turning back the following day, it happened that a Negro, while out seeking firewood, gave chase to a white deer which he saw, and discovered by this circumstance the road between two ridges, which appeared to be cut artificially rather than by nature. With the commotion of this news, we began climbing, finding much loose rock heaped up where we figured there had been a walkway undone by the passage of time. We spent a good 3 hours on the climb, though gentle because of the crystals we admired along the way, and at the peak of the mountain we halted. Looking out from there, we saw in a flat field even greater displays for our admiration. We beheld something at 1.5 leagues distance, a great settlement, its expansive dimensions causing us to believe that it was some city of the Brazilian coast, and then this has in brackets, or court. It must have been the original transcriber that was writing it from the original document to a copy for the library. We soon descended into the valley with caution. In similar case, ordering the quality and good that we noticed chimneys, this being one of the clear signs of settlements. We waited 2 days for the scouts, to the end that we greatly desired, and we only had the sound of roosters by which to judge that there were people there. Until the arrival of our men, undeceived, there were no residents, which confused them. An Indian of our company then decided to enter cautiously, assuming all risk. But, returning astonished, he affirmed that he did not find nor uncover any trace of any person. This matter bewildered us such that we did not believe it, based on the dwellings we had seen. And thus all of the explorers sprang to and went, following in the footsteps of the Indian. They came confirming the aforementioned attestation that there were no people, and so we all decided to enter the city armed by night without anyone to come out to meet us and impede our passage. And we found no other road besides the one with the great city, whose entrance was through 3 arches of great height. The one in the middle is bigger, and the 2 on the sides are smaller. Above the great and principal one, we saw letters that couldn't be copied down because of the great height. From there runs a street with the breadth of the 3 arches, which are with lofted houses on either side, with borders of smoothed stone. This word was like only semi-read and placed in brackets. And already blackened inscriptions, opened all, are good. Noting that by the uniformity and symmetry with which they are made, it appears to be a single property of houses, being in reality many, and some with their roofs, in brackets, uncovered and without shingles, because some of the ceilings are of fired tile and others of slabs. With great dread, we scanned some of the houses, and in none of them did we find vestiges of effects or furnishings, that we might know, by their use and treatment, the quality of the locals. All of the houses were dark inside, and there is only a scarce light. And as they are vaulted, the echoes of those who spoke resonated, and their own voices frightened them. Having walked and seen the entirety of this long street, we came to a square plaza, in the middle of which was a black stone pillar of extraordinary size. And on top of that was a statue of an ordinary man, with his left hand on his waist and his right arm extended, pointing with his index finger to the North Pole. In each corner of said plaza is a spire, in the style of those used by the Romans, but some of which were damaged and split as if struck by lightning bolts. What an interesting observation.
Yeah.
Very astute. On the right side of this plaza is a superb building, as if the principal abode of some lord of the land. There is a great hall at the entrance, and, still afraid, we didn't scan all of the houses. There being so many, and to form some, we found of deprived them of lifting it. The bats were so numerous that they flew into the faces of the people, and created such a ruckus that it evoked awe. Above the principal gateway of the street is a figure in mid-relief, carved in the same stone, and naked from the waist up, crowned with a laurel. It shows a person young in age, without a beard, wearing a band across him and an apron about his waist. Beneath the shield of said figure, there are some characters which have already been deteriorated by time. One can clearly see, however, the following. We're going to post this image for those watching on the YouTube. On the YouTube channel.
The YouTube.
It appears to be like a script version of a K, a V, a J with a circle around the head of the J, an I, and then a large Z. I wonder if that's why they call it the city of Z.
Interesting.
Or Z. It's always a Z. On the left side of said plaza is another building, completely in ruin, and the ruins clearly show that it was a temple, because part of its magnificent front piece is still preserved, as well as some of the naves of whole stone. It occupies a great area, and on its ruined walls one sees exquisite works, with some figures and portraits inlaid in the stone, with crosses of various styles, consoles, or crows. They don't know which word it was, consoles or crows. and other sundries, which would take too long to describe. Oh, how convenient. You don't want to describe these amazing things that you're seeing.
You would think that would be some important detail that you would write down.
Right. This is why it's fake. No. Following this building is a larger section of town, all destroyed and sunken in large by awful openings in the earth. And in all this vicinity, no herb, tree, or plant produced by nature is seen, but only heaps of rock, some rough and others smooth, by which we understood because yet of cadavers which, of this unfortunate and desolated perhaps by some earthquake. Cadavers? And the worms ate that? Come on now, we're talking about dead bodies. In front of said plaza runs a torrential river, rapturously broad and spacious, with some banks that make it very pleasing to the sight. It has a breadth of 11 to 12 fathoms without considerable windings. The banks are clear of tree and growth logs, which floods tend to bring. We sounded its depth and found it to be in the deepest parts 15 to 16 fathoms, and on the other side all is very lush fields, with such a variety of flowers that it seems only the most careful nature walked through these parts, bringing about the most delicate fields of flora. We also admired some ponds, a full of rice, which we made use of. And we made use of the innumerable flocks of ducks which feed on the fertility of these fields, having no difficulty in hunting them without lead with our hands.
Right.
Wow, they hunted geese with their hands. Oh, maybe it meant lead instead of lead. So without lead, using their guns and then their hands. Okay. I wondered if they were talking about some sort of other hunting terms that I don't know.
That's kind of interesting, though, that they would word it that way. We didn't
without
have to
lead.
use lead.
I wonder if that's what the Portuguese called bullets.
Right.
Yeah. Because from what I understand, the Germans call like bullets like Kugels, which to me it meant cone. But at any rate, back to Manuscript 512. We walked downriver for 3 days and came to a waterfall of such thunderous noise because of the force of the waters and the resistance in that place that we figured it wouldn't be louder at the mouths of the legendary Nile, which is actually quite quiet. I was just there.
Right.
After this drop, the river sort of splays out, looking like the great ocean. It is all full of peninsulas which are covered in green grass with some scattered trees which make, here we found, the lack of it, variety of game, many animals propagated without hunters that run them down and pursue them. On the east side of this waterfall, we found various caverns and horrifying pits, and we tested their depth with many ropes, despite the length of which we could never reach the bottom. We also found some loose rocks on the surface of the earth, which were infused with silver, as if removed from the mines and left to time or the weather. Along these caverns, we saw one which was covered with a large slab, with the following figures carved on the same stone, which suggest a great mystery, it would seem. So you have some sort of cross or T symbol with an equal sign, and then a U with a little loop back on it on the right side, a cursive Z, a letter unfamiliar to me looking like a backwards Y, O, S, right? And of course, these are the Portuguese bandeirantes, like how they looked at it and what they would have interpreted it as in their mind as, oh, that appears to be a T or something like a T. I'll write a T. So we may, this is a, photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of something.
Right, it's a game of telephone.
Yeah, the original inscription itself may not look anything like this, but to a European hand that's used to writing such, European scripts, anything foreign, he would have probably smoothed out the rough edges, things like that.
Right. Make it look like something that's at least recognizable.
Of course. Right. And so next, moving on, it says, above the portico of the temple, we saw others given in the following form. I'm not going to go in to describe these. These are all, except for a T, these are all completely foreign.
Right.
There's no analog to it in Latin script. Away from the city, a cannon shot's distance. Americans will literally measure anything in any unit of measure
to avoid the metric
Yes,
system.
cannon shot's distance is a building like a countryside manor of 250 paces breadth on the breadth. Sorry, I want to emphasize that, so I didn't say breadth. 250 paces breadth on the front side. One enters through a great portico and ascends a staircase of stone of various colors, landing in a great room, which then goes into 15 smaller houses, each with their doors facing said room. And upon each, with its water spout, or gutter, which water gathers in the courtyard, colonnades, insert artificially squared, and suspended with the following characters. Again, more somewhat Greco-Roman. I see an A, and I see an E, and another E, and then I see the omega, and, well, no,
Omicron?
the O with the line in
Yeah.
it is Omicron, yeah. Omega's the horseshoe-looking one.
Right.
See, I don't know shit. Okay, but obviously we're going to attach all these pictures into the video so you guys can get a look at them too.
Gotta have a visual.
Right. After these ponderings, we entered by the banks of the river to conduct a test of finding gold, and without trouble we found good flecks on the surface of the earth, promising much abundance of both gold and silver, because where there's gold there's silver, because it comes naturally in in electrum. Right. Gold is not pure when it's found naturally. It's mixed with silver and some other metals. We wondered at the abandonment of the city by those who inhabited it, not having found by our exact diligence through these hinterlands any person who tells us of this pitiful marvel of who this people was. So of whom these people were. Its ruins clearly show the form and grandeur it would have had, and how it would have been populous and opulent during the centuries in which it flourished with people. Today it is inhabited by swallows, bats, rats, and foxes. These foxes, glutted on the many flocks of chickens and ducks, grow larger than a partridge hound.
Interesting.
Yeah. The rats have such short legs that they jump like fleas and don't walk or run like those found in cities. See, now after reading some of these things, I'm looking and I'm wondering, okay, do we have an animal like a mouse or a rat that looks like that, right? And this is some more research that I'm going to have to do to kind of confirm this. But they're also talking about rivers and waterfalls and large holes. I mean, are there geographic locations in Bahia that match this?
Right.
Or even the surrounding provinces and states around it? Who knows how lost these guys actually were?
Right.
Right. Because at one point it read that they thought that they were at... they traveled on a river and they thought they were going out to the ocean. Or because there was the original city that they found, they thought it was a Brazilian city,
right,
like a Portuguese settlement. So they had almost a sense of like loss of direction,
right?
Which, I mean, could be easy to do in the jungle because you can't really see the sun because of the canopy. But I would still imagine that people know north and south, and they probably have people in the group that are excellent trackers.
Native.
And the native, they said they had an Indian.
Right. It is interesting though. I mean, there was no. They're so far from what you could consider civilization that I mean, they're just completely lost in the middle of nowhere.
Right. I'm still surprised how they got an Indian all the way to Brazil. I mean, was he like Sikh, Hindu?
A little history joke in there.
Oh. From this point, one of our companions split off with a few others, and after 9 days at a good pace, they beheld on the shore of a large cove made by a river a canoe with 2 white people with loose black hair dressed in European style, and firing a shot as a signal to flee. Furry and Wild all became irritated at them and attack. One of our companions, named How Antonio, found a gold coin in the ruins of a house. It was round and larger than our coins of 6,400. On one side, it had the image or depiction of a boy kneeling, and on the other side was a bow, a crown, and an arrow. We do not doubt that many of its kind can be found in the aforementioned settlement or desolate city, because if it was subverted by an earthquake, the suddenness wouldn't allow time for putting away precious things.
Right.
But it would take a very strong and powerful arm to overturn that rubble, settled by so many years, as is evident. These notices I send to VM from this hinterland, those are initials, VM, from this hinterland of Bavaria, of Bahia, and from the rivers of Paraguaçu, or Paraguaçu, I don't know how that C is made in Portuguese, Paraguaçu and Una. We've settled not to give share in this to any person, because we judge that the villages and camps would empty out. But to you, VM, I give of the mines that we have discovered. So they discovered these mines, right? Remembering the much that I owe you. Since a man has already departed from our company with a different pretext, I beg of you, VM, throw off your poverty and come take advantage of these great things. This Indian will use his adeptness at bribery to make himself hidden and lead you, VM, to these treasures we'll find in the entrances upon slabs. They seem to have ordinal numbers, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, that maybe he believes that these numbers were, or these things may have been, but there's no telling, because it's written by script,
right?
Which was copy of written script, which is copy of carved engravings. That's the end. That's all we know. All the juicy stuff was basically redacted by the FBI.
It's very interesting to me that all of the juicy bits, the parts that you're like, oh, well, what did they find?
Yeah,
they're
eaten by a worm.
Lost.
They were the juiciest bits. No wonder the worm ate them.
It is very interesting, though.
So there was a mention of the mines of Muribeca, which this was the El Dorado of Brazil at the time. The Portuguese El Dorado, right? The mines of Muribeca. So there's an article here from the diplomatinspain.com. Right. I think I sent you this link prior to. I'm just going to summarize it. I'm sure everyone's tired of listening to me read. So, all right. Origin of the land of gold, silver, and jewels story, right? In the 16th century, Portuguese ship wrecked off of the coast of Brazil, right? A lone survivor named Diego Alvarez, he survived, and he lived among the Guarani Indians, natives. Muribeca was either a son, grandson. He was a descendant of Diego, and he discovered these mines. So he may have discovered them naturally, or he may have known by his native family,
right,
where these things were: gold, silver, precious jewels, right? So in 1622, Roberto Diaz, so I'm talking the 1500s, the Portuguese shipwreck. In 1622, Roberto Diaz, I think it's either him or his son, knew the location, and so he told the Portuguese king, hey, I know where the mines are. If you give me the title of viceroy or governor or whatever, I'll come back and show your men where these are, right? And in typical fashion, they tell you don't open this until you get there and blah, 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 right? So that there's no question that the document's been tampered with en route or anything,
don't
right?
It's
opened, the seal is broken, and everyone reads it. He opens this letter, and he was not given the title of governor. He was given adventure captain, basically. Captain of expedition, which is a horrible title to have. Right? Because you get nothing. Basically, the crown takes everything from you. You don't even get to claim land, right? And you have to return, right? Because I don't even know why he went out in the jungle. Probably facing fear of mutiny or arrest by the actual governor, right? So he never reveals it because he didn't get the title he wanted. So he refused,
right?
So I'm sure they imprisoned him and things like that. I also have written here the names Francisco Raposo and João Silva Guimarães, but I don't remember why I wrote their names. This is okay. They believe that Francisco Raposo was the leader of the group of bandeirantes. So the guy that we didn't know the name of in the actual document.
Right.
I think what they did is in the diplomatinSpain.com, they kind of went back. Okay, who was in charge of different groups? What did they do? What are the dates? How long were they gone? How long? They kind of did.
And they would match up.
They mathed, you know. And so they think it was Francisco Raposo. And so it is believed now that he wrote it. But Wikipedia won't tell you that, so suck it, Wikipedia. Right, and so that's like the origin story of why these bandeirantes, they went there. So you have these subsequent expeditions after the document was rediscovered in 1839, right? Because the mines of Muribeca, everyone wants to go find gold and silver. Like that's the coolest thing ever.
That was the impetus behind all of the adventure at that time.
Right.
Finding gold and silver. And
so in these subsequent expeditions, now this is where it kind of gets interesting, right? And this is also where it gets super like, okay, I don't know if I trust the subsequent stuff anymore.
Right.
We'll talk about the actual stuff. You and I will here in a minute. In 1878, so 40 years, almost 40 years after the document was rediscovered, Teodoro Sampaio claimed that he found it in the area. So he found the city, the lost city of Zed, if you will, in the area of the São Francisco River because of the caves and petroglyphs that he found there.
Right.
Which I haven't found any convincing pictures of or like illustrations that he made or anything. I'm sure they may exist out there, but probably in a book that's been out of print for over 100 years.
Right.
So he found caves with petroglyphs, but no city. So he thinks he was in the right spot because of the geographic information that they gave
that he
in
had
the manuscript.
To go off of, yeah.
Right? And so he comes up with... so he's followed up by an Englishman, Lieutenant Colonel O'Sullivan Bear. Right? So he came over in 1913, claimed it was on the right side of the bank of the São Francisco River, and a 12 days ride from Salvador da Bahia. And he said that the ruins can be seen in the wood line, like at the very edge of the jungle. You can kind of start seeing it, right? And he must have come at it from another angle because he was in the large fields that in the manuscript that they were talking about.
Right.
So then seeing the sudden jungle, you know, so maybe he came from a slightly different direction, right? Skip forward from 1913 to 1921 through 1925. You have Colonel Percy Fawcett, who's the Indiana Jones guy, right? He believed it to be in the vicinity of the Mato Grosso. So he had actually met Bear, O'Sullivan Bear, right? Bear gave him a basalt idol that he brought back.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah, the basalt idol is a really interesting thing. There's pictures of it. I can't tell you the authenticity of it. I don't think anyone has seen it since it was sold at like a garage sale in the 60s. Which, what?
Boggles the mind.
Yeah, like this is supposed to be like one of the most important and like defining things that tell you that there was an ancient and quote unquote advanced. We're not talking flying cars or anything like that. We're just talking about unsuspected.
They weren't just,
primitives and Birkenstocks and butt flaps with pointy sticks, right? So he believed it to be in the vicinity of the Mato Grosso, and he ventured into the western zone of the Lencois, in the areas of Serra de Cincora and Orobo. Fawcett found petroglyphs in La Pina, and then he vanished along with the basalt idol. I make that sound so quick, but it was over the span of 4 years.
Right.
Right. So he found petroglyphs. At least he claimed he did. There's petroglyphs all over the place, carvings in the stone. Right. In the 1930s, Apollinaire Frot, a French engineer that supposedly knew Bahia like the back of his hand, believed that the ancient ruins, if he found them, could most likely be proven as Proto-Egyptian or Phoenician.
Interesting.
He disappeared. And, of course, everyone always talked about these scripts. I mean, as I was describing them, I used European letters to describe what I see. And with the Greco-Roman architecture and with somewhat similar scripts. Yeah, it's like, oh, Atlantis. That's what I always go to is Atlantis.
And you got to think, too, I mean, the Europeans, that would be their reference point also. So even if it wasn't really that similar, that's what they would describe it as.
Right. Yeah, that's their only frame of reference that they can give. And so, of course, if you see two lines making, an unfinished triangle. Right.
It's an A.
Yeah, it could be an A or, any semblance of a line in between it. It's obviously an A.
Right.
But I wish I could go find these things. We need to take LiDAR down there. We need to take the geographical information that was given, and we need to just go scan that area, see if there's any man-made or giant-made. What's up, Nephas? Nephilim. Sorry, I have to give. Some of you might not know what that is. Okay, let's back up.
I love that you just pulled that. I love it. I love it.
Let's back up. Facts of the actual ruins themselves, right? We have found sewage systems and hold on. Yeah. There are sewage systems and aqueducts that are quite advanced throughout the Americas.
Right.
Like we know these things exist. They're all over Mexico. They're all over Central or Mesoamerica. They're all over South America. These people weren't just Birkenstocks and butt flaps.
Right.
They became primitives, it seems, right? There's buildings and ruins, as I said. I wanted to bring in a little bit of a hypothesis. If these things exist, right? These buildings may be so old that they were destroyed by the Younger Dryas impact, which is also a hypothesis, so I'm stacking hypotheses here. Or they could have been destroyed by the Portuguese. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason I say they could have been destroyed by the Portuguese, right, is
I like this one.
It's a big secret cover-up, right? You have the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, so directly after Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas, because they were previously covered to the European mind. They were discovered, right? In 1494, areas of Brazil were originally allocated to Spain with that treaty,
right? Because
they didn't have longitude. Yeah, they hadn't fully understood the actual circumference of the globe, because still they thought they were in the Indies.
Right.
So parts of Brazil on a poorly, crudely hand-drawn map. I'm not going to say poorly or crudely. These people actually sailed across the ocean, and they
but it was based on imperfect calculations.
Right, and actual coastline information. There's gaps at night. Right. They don't always stop, and whatever. The maps are drawn poorly in relation to our GPS and satellite imagery. Right. And so they're primitive maps, if you will. And so the lines that went through by the Treaty of Tordesillas cut only a little bit for Portugal, but they gave it a numerical line to follow, and that line was adjusted much later. So actually, the parts of Bahia and some of the Amazon jungle belong to Spain, according to this. So let's see, the Portuguese took these lands after some time due to the Treaty of Madrid in 1750. It was a jus possidetis. You can have it if you're using it. Right. So it's the right of the possessor. Jus possidetis is Latin. This was all orchestrated by the Vatican too. The Pope had a huge
I remember reading that.
Thing in this, right? And so whoever is actually there gets it. That was the agreement that Spain made with Portugal in 1750. So, but there are issues with European land claims, right? Especially in the Catholic world, right? So, because the Pope being the mediator, any prior civilizations or evidences of Europeans being there could potentially have overturned any Portuguese claim to said lands because Jus Possidentis, Possidentis. Well, if the Spanish aren't going to use it and we are, it's ours. However, what if there was another European or Christian or whatever civilization there before?
It completely upends any land
Portuguese
claims that they had. Yeah,
correct. And so, out of place artifacts, geoglyphs, art, etc. Like that's kind of the big deal with this thing is everything seems so out of place. I jumped out of that the Portuguese land claim thing because that's where the Portuguese would have destroyed stuff if it belonged to anyone else, because then that would upend, like you said. So again, skipping forward, next topic kind of thing. These out of place artifacts and geoglyphs and things like that, like where did these come from? Where are all these things? Why would somebody back then have made it up and then not even gone and claimed the riches for himself?
Right.
I mean, why would he even give them to somebody else? I mean, I don't know who VM is. Maybe he was fat and lazy or didn't exist or whatever. So he seems like a nice guy or whatever, but he's made up a bunch of stuff. And it should be mentioned that Brazil did not get its name from mythology. I just wanted to reiterate that the High Brazil from the Gaelic traditions has no relation to regular Brazil. Yeah. What do you think?
It's really interesting stuff. I don't know if I'm sold on it, because it makes so much sense to me that someone in this time period, especially with the incentives that they had, they would say, "Oh yes, Mr. King, I found this, crazy land of all untold riches. Yeah. Would you like to give me a large title?"
Right.
Oh no? Well, then you won't get it.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes perfect sense to me.
It's a huge bargaining. Yeah, the king's never going to go over there.
Right. However, I don't want to say I want to believe it. I think it's very plausible, because you never know.
Right. I would hate to go down there and find something and then immediately associate it with it.
Right.
But because we didn't get a lot of gold and silver that came out of Brazil, not that I know of.
Right.
Right.
There really was. I mean, they went into this thinking that there were there was all of this riches, gold and silver, and there really wasn't that much.
Yeah, I mean, I watched El Dorado too. Right. I mean, I know that they blocked the entrance to it, with a carved boat out of a single piece of tree.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was more interested in reading some of these other articles outside of it, where they talk about, like on The Diplomat in Spain, they talk about how these three-body Roman arches are similar in resemblance to the Roman city of Timgad in Algeria.
Yes, yeah. We had been talking about that earlier.
Right. Residential building. Like the way he described it, as if he had been to Roman places, which Portugal and Spain, of course, naturally. But that was like the western poor side of Rome.
Right.
Well, south side of Rome.
And I remember there was some part in there where he was talking about the roofs, that they were fired tile.
Yeah.
That's very Mediterranean.
Yeah. Like, he chose very weird things to describe. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like he walked in and was like, yes, there was a vast city. Everything was made of gold, like bricks and everything. Right. He was like, no, these are like ancient ruins. Everything's destroyed and desolate. Right. And it's really weird that nothing is here. Because it looked like such a big city. Right. Now, the crystals on the mountains, I was wondering if... just having been to Egypt and this thing's fresh in my mind, my thoughts immediately went to like limestone and having like calcite and gypsum, because those are shiny. Right. And whenever you're in a place and you see sharp, shiny and stuff like that, like you immediately start looking at that. I mean, I was kind of like, I laughed a little bit when we all got to the pyramids, like the bent pyramid, and all these adults, like all the way up to like in their 70s too, they were just all like, oh, rocks everywhere, rocks. Oh, such interesting shiny rocks. And there's like a massive pyramid right in front of us, and no one's looking at it. They're all looking at the rocks.
Our monkey brains really like the shiny things.
Yeah, shiny things are awesome. But yeah, so I mean, it was just weird because they described waterfalls and caves where like gold deposits with signs of being not excavated but mined.
Right.
And they were like old mines, like they looked old and abandoned. And they saw a canoe with men with European facial features. Mm-hmm. Now, if this was a canoe at such a great distance that they thought, now this is the part of the story where it was like blank blank and they fired shots and blank blank. I mean, they could have had paint.
Right.
It was very common to find natives with painting. I mean, in Christopher Columbus's journal, he talked about how they covered, their bodies in paint and this and that. And European facial features, though, that was interesting. So they must have been close enough. Mm-hmm. And, of course, they've seen natives before. They had an Indian in their group.
Right.
So he looked different
from
them.
They knew what they were talking about.
Right. At least. And they fled as they were discovered. Now, it could have been another group of...
Banderantes.
Yeah. And they were just like, oh, crap, Maybe they were going somewhere to hide something. But... No, so I'm going to skip over to an article that was written on the Mysteries of Antiquity blog.wordpress. Now, this is, super reliable source that I've never heard of before.
You know that it's right. It's some secret esoteric knowledge when it's WordPress.
Right, but this also mentions Francisco Raposo that made this manuscript in 1753. Yeah. So I don't know where this name comes from. Like, who... found this name.
Who discovered or decided that was accurate.
And I remember reading another article that kind of, or maybe watching a video on YouTube, I forget, but they kind of like, did the math and figured who was there in this general area at this time. So they assume he was the captain of this expedition. Right? And this one is just a big summary. They call them Cyclopean walls. I don't even really truly understand what that means. I'm thinking it's just a wall with a great one singular entrance in the middle. Right. Thinking about Cyclops.
Right.
But, or it means the great size of a Cyclops, referring to the Odyssey. That
either way,
that they're giant sense, and the structure's huge, right? Okay, so I'll read this. There is also the description of several environments observed by the Banderantes, admired and confused by their finding, all reported with associations of the narrator, such as the square on which stood a black column, which this wasn't mentioned in the... I remember reading black column. I remember reading column in Romanesque style.
Right.
With a statue that pointed to the north, which would have been the cardinal direction, not north. Like true north,
right?
Magnetic north,
right?
It was probably true north is
magnetic north.
Yeah, whatever. I forget land nav.
It's been
years. The portico of the street that was surmounted by a naked figure from the waist up and had its head a crown of laurel. Oh, sorry, I'm getting tired reading this. Yeah, he just over and over and over describes how it looks Roman, right? Like the statues look like Augustus or things that are in the Vatican, things like that.
Well, there's a famous statue of Augustus in that same pose with a hand on his hip and pointing. Interesting.
Yeah, and this one goes into the same information as the article from the Diplomat in Spain, talking about other guys' trips and things like that. Yeah. Okay, so break it down. For me, it definitely seems like there could be something in the jungle. We find with LiDAR all the time that there's man-made buildings and monuments and things.
Right.
Not monuments, that makes it sound like super big, but man-made earthenworks, man-made like cities and things like that. We find them in the jungles all the time. It's believed that the Americas were populated with much greater volume and density than initially believed, because the Clovis culture as the Clovis first, that model is out. We know that people were here tens of thousands of years.
Right.
Before the Clovis culture. They were some of the last to actually be able to cross the Bering Strait. And the reason why we find their stuff so prominent is because we don't dig below them.
Right.
right? And you're not going to find a lot of stuff on the same site, if you just keep digging down. Like, I'm not going to dig straight down and eventually I'll hit Native American stuff here.
Right.
But no, I think that the Americas were definitely populated. And of course, you can start talking about Atlantis and the links between
Right.
Europe and Africa and the Americas. But that's when you're talking about Atlantis and you truly go along with what Plato described in Timaeus and Critias, is that was 11,600 years ago.
Right.
I am skeptical that stone ruins weren't completely grown over in the jungle, because like in the Yucatan, there are pyramids that were completely buried by sediment and overtaken by the jungle in just a couple hundred years.
Right.
There's no way that these people found entire cities just completely bereft of forestation.
Right. They had to have been fairly recent, at least in their time.
Right. And, this is this journey was 1753. The mines of Muribeca, why the Bandeirantes were there was because of the 100 years before the story of the mines of Muribeca.
Right.
Which were from 100 years before then.
It's just a big historical game of telephone.
Right. And so when was this built? Why was it built? How truly similar to Rome is it? Were they just using it as a simile, or were they actually like truly blown away by, hey, this is Roman.
Right.
We see this all over the place in Spain and Portugal and Italy, Greece. They make no real detailed analysis of it. It can't be Greco-Roman because the lettering doesn't match up if what they wrote in pen and ink is truly what was on stone.
Right. Well, and he said he had described the arch, it was of such great size that the inscription he couldn't read.
Yeah, exactly. They could only make out parts of it.
Right.
They only saw kind of what they wanted to see at that point.
Right. Which makes some of it even more dubious, but there clearly was something. I mean, it was
the fact that it was
down.
A script and not, you don't call them hieroglyphs when you're referring to anything outside of
Just
Egypt.
Glyphs.
Glyphs, yeah. There weren't any glyphs, and obviously we can't even say Mayan that's thousands of miles away.
Right.
Right. So. Written language,
right? But it had to have been something at least, right? And if they have written language, I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, I would like to assume that there's even a grain of truth in this.
Right.
That would be worthwhile going and investigating. I mean, so many of these guys literally died looking for it.
Right. And it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, the Spanish came over here and tripped over several different civilizations, wiped some of them out, but it's not out of the realm of possibility at all that there are civilizations, that large or small, that were just covered up by the jungle and we haven't discovered them. I mean, it's so vast, and there's really no reason for everyone to be out wandering in the jungle because it's assumed that there's nothing there.
Right. And so my plan is to go back, reread this stuff, look at all the other adventurers, look at their maps, what their plans were, where they thought they saw things, and I'm going to take drones. We're going to bring LiDAR. We're going to bring a lot of machetes, a lot of bug spray. And I would really like to go in and venture into the Amazon and try to find at least a couple stacks of, stone blocks stacked on each other.
Absolutely.
I mean,
any find is huge.
Yeah, to me, the idea that these mines existed. Now, these guys totally were looking for the mines, and they found cities as a consequence of their journey. This was totally unexpected for them, and it was so profound that it was written about. And it wasn't. They were straight up like, "There's no gold here." They're like, "There's nothing. We didn't find the mines,
right? And
we went here. We found one gold coin." What was really interesting, though, and everyone should take a look at this, is the architecture. Like, if you wanted to lie and be like, yeah, there's nothing out here, why would you even mention another place that has
bother?
absolutely nothing unless you're literally trying to distract somebody from the actual mine because you found them and you were like, hey, yeah, go check out in the mountains while we're down here at the mouth of the river that it's fed out of a cave.
Go to the left, not the right.
Yeah, yeah, but he didn't give particular directions, which is crazy because you would think like, oh, for this many days we traveled this direction, this many. I mean, this was probably written as a letter not to even be read by anyone else except the VM, who is the recipient. Who is VM? No idea. I'd like to go back and see, what was his name? Francisco Raposo.
Right.
If I'd like to go back on his Facebook and see who he's friends with and see whose initials make VM, right? Like, we're never gonna know. We'll never know this stuff, and that's like what particularly interests me about it, because I think that there are cities there, how Greco-Roman they are, how Atlantean, how Cyclopean they are.
Right.
Like, that's not important to me. What's important to me is actually
Are
going
they
there.
there?
I want to know. So on that, we just hit a full hour.
Oh, look at that.
So time flies.
When you're talking about the mysterious.
Okay, if you guys know anything out there listening about Manuscript 512 or about that Amazon area, right, of Bahia, we would love to know what you have to say and think about this stuff, because we've only just read, I mean, we're just breaking into this topic today. Right. It's not that we researched this for hours and hours. We just read over some documents and wanted to go through it.
And we're lay people.
Right. We have no idea what we're talking about. We don't even speak Portuguese.
Right.
Right. If you liked the content, please give us a like, subscribe, leave us a comment, and let us know what you want us to talk about. We're literally willing to talk about any historical thing. Yeah. I mean, World War One. If you want to talk about Atlantis, we can get into that. But
we're flapping our wings right now.
Right? Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about Nazis in Antarctica or Nazis in space,
the Hollow Earth,
Hyperborea. Hyperborea. We're getting out of my reach here. No, any historical topic, just leave it in the comments. We'll address it, and we'll literally give it the best shot we got. Yeah, at least we'll display information about it, get it out to the public. But Manuscript 512, short little letter, eaten by worms. Go worms! Like to find those worms and give them a piece of my mind.
All the juicy bits eaten by the worms.
I hate bookworms, and I am one. I have 400 something books. At any rate, good night.